Originally from Cape Town, South Africa, Sigourney has served as conservator for the Georgia Archive since 2019. Her previous work experience includes paper and photograph conservation work in Philadelphia, New Jersey, and at the University of Cape Town Special Collections Library. She holds a BA in Fine Art from the University of Cape Town and an MA in Conservation of Fine Art, specializing in paper conservation from Northumbria University, UK. Everyone, please help me in welcoming Sigourney Stanford.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Robin, for that introduction. As Robin mentioned, it's not enough just to find your records. It's also important to know how to properly look after them so that these records can be enjoyed by future generations and make sure that they can live a long life and share the history that they record. So, first thing is important to know is that all organic materials degrade over time. It's just natural, the same way that trees will rot in the forest when they have passed and died. Same with organic materials. Most of the records you deal with are organic materials. Paper is made from cellulose, which is either coming from a plant material like wood or cotton, anything like that. So that is just naturally going to want to degrade. So we are really fighting against the natural inclination of these things when we are trying to keep them preserved for as long as possible. There are various things that can affect how fast something degrades or how slow it degrades. So I'm going to get into the various factors that cause items to degrade and how you can work against them or with them to preserve these for as long as possible. The first biggest factor we're going to discuss is your environment. This is both internal and external environment. So if you were to think about where you store your records, that is the environment they are in. So your home, where do you keep these? We don't want to keep them in the bathroom, in the kitchen, in the garage, all these kind of places that it's uncontrolled temperature and humidity. We also don't want to have them someplace where they get exposed to the outside temperature and humidity, especially here in Georgia. Lots of heat, lots of humidity, all those things are not archive and item friendly. So we want to make sure that we try to keep the temperature between 60 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and also try to keep the relative humidity between 40 to 55% relative humidity. And as you can see again, Georgia is very much not in those ranges naturally. So we want to make sure that we store them inside someplace where we can control that temperature and humidity. The biggest factor is to try and minimize fluctuations. So if you imagine the temperature going up and down during the day and night, or the humidity levels going up and down, the best way I like to describe it is if you imagine having a paper clip, and if you bend it back on itself, eventually it snaps and breaks. The same thing is happening, say, for example, inside a paper document. When the moisture content increases, it expands. When it decreases, it contracts, and it's that paper clip bending back and forth. So those fluctuations are what really cause the most damage. And you also want to think of security when you select your location. I imagine that a lot of these items are precious to you. You don't want to have it just randomly someplace where anyone can have access, because that also means that they may be handling them inappropriately and potentially cause damage. So as I said, you want to avoid any expansion and contraction fluctuations that are too great, because as I said, when paper it's wet, it expands, and when it dries out, it contracts. So we want to keep those expansion contractions as low as possible. You also want to try avoid unstable environments. So attics and basements are by and large no-no. Basements are prone to flooding and leaks and things like gravity. If there's any water in the house, it's going to go down and it's going to end up in the basement. Same with attics. It tends to be more exposed. Maybe there's a leak in the roof, or there's less insulation in those areas, so the temperature can be much higher, the humidity levels can be much higher. So those tend to be bad places to store records. There's also a little bit of out of sight, out of mind. If you store them kind of too far away, you just think, oh, they're there, it's fine. The number of records that we get into the archives here, where some institution or agency had them stored just, oh, they were in the basement, and then finally they get here and they're in terrible condition because nobody bothered to keep an eye on them. So avoid damp areas or leaky areas. You also want to make sure that all items are stored at least 4 inches off the ground. That means that if you do have a pipe burst or a leak or anything like that, they're not going to get wet. So I have my little pointer, if I may. So you can see here, these just used foam blocks to just keep the box off the ground. And then we don't have to worry if there were to be a leak. Obviously, if there were a leak, the humidity in the area will go up as well, but at least they're not wet. One thing to be careful of is what you use to lift them off the ground. Things like wood or cardboard, anything like that, is going to absorb that water, and then it's going to travel, the water's going to travel into the box anyway. So things like foam, plastic, stuff like that is better. The next big factor we want to consider is light. This could be both direct sunlight or artificial light like we have in this room with the overhead lights. Light can affect items in a lot of ways and can be very damaging. Light can cause heat damage, especially if you have direct natural sunlight. That's got a lot of heat. It's got all those ultraviolet and infrared radiation that causes a lot of damage. The ultraviolet damage also causes a lot of damage to items and can cause this paper darkening, where it turns this was a white piece of paper back in the day, but because of its exposure to light, the paper had darkened to this dark color. And you may have seen this if you've ever seen like a newspaper that's been left outside and it turns that dark brown or yellow color. That is light damage. It also can cause color fading. So here we have a photograph, and you could see the original color where it was protected under the frame, but where it was exposed to the light, the media, the pigments had been bleached by the sun. And this, again, you might have seen this just at home if you've ever had something hanging in a window, and then over time it lightens and fades. This also can accelerate all the degradation and aging. So the natural process of it breaking down will speed up, both because of the heat and the UV radiation. The main problem with the UV radiation is that it accelerates any chemical reactions, so they happen faster. So as I said, you want to avoid direct sunlight, and you can do this by using shades or blinds in those areas so that they're not being exposed to direct light. And this is also something you may want to consider when you're working with your records, that you work with them in a space where they don't have an open window right there for the light to be shining on them. We want to rather cut out that light. One way you can also try avoid any additional light damage is you can use LED lights, which are great just in terms of their longevity, that you don't have to replace the bulbs as much. But LEDs don't emit any UV radiation or infrared radiation. So like most of the lighting in the archives here is LEDs to protect our records. Another factor is good housekeeping. We don't want any pests or insects or anything getting into our collections. You may have seen some records where there's maybe some grazing across the surface or something munched on the corners. Rats and rodents will use paper documents and books and things to make their nests. So they'll chew on them and then kind of rearrange them to make their nests. And then other insects will eat the paper documents because it's food. It still is an organic material, which is food to them. Books can be especially damaged because of all the adhesives on the spine, especially older books. Those are usually gelatin-based adhesives, so it's very attractive to pests because it's a very yummy food for them. And here you can see a poor map that was really riddled by insect or pest damage. Another factor you may want to consider is your storage. So what boxes you store them in, what folders you store them in, those sorts of things. The items that are closest, or the materials that are closest to your archival items, are going to have the biggest effect on them. You may have seen sometimes if you had, say, for example, a newspaper clipping in a scrapbook or something like that, or a newspaper clipping in a pile next to other documents, and you see that where the newspaper clipping was, the document underneath turns this brown color. That means that the acidity from that newspaper is leaching into the document below it. Because newspapers, by and large, are horrible paper. They're not meant to last. You're meant to buy a newspaper, read it, throw it out, buy another one tomorrow. We are the crazy people that are trying to keep these things going longer than their natural lives. So that's an example of how something directly next to something else can cause damage. Another thing about storage is that it can create a microclimate because there's no air exchange or minimized air exchange. So that can help protect against fluctuations in humidity and temperature because it's going to be slower for that to go into the box where your items are. One side effect of that you also want to keep in mind is that if you have items stored in boxes or cabinets and cases, if the temperature drops too fast, the humidity may rise too fast as well because it's not having that air exchange. So it's not a cure-all, but it can help, but you need to just be aware of these sorts of factors. You can also use storage to have good cataloging, so that it means that you're going to handle these items less. Every time you pick up something, every time you handle it, you're putting it at risk of damage, either accidental from by dropping it or tearing it accidentally, but also if your hands are dirty, things like that, you can damage these items. So we don't want to overhandle them. So good storage means that they can be cataloged and you don't have to access all of them to get to this one thing. You can find it very quickly. You can either use paper or plastic folders and sleeves to help store these items. Paper item folders are great because they can help protect them from each other. Say, for example, you got that acidic newspaper clipping that can be in a folder, so it's not going to be next to another document that it could leach acidity into. Plastic sleeves can be great as well if you've got something very fragile, because then when you handle it, you're not handling the actual object, you're handling the plastic, and it's got less risk of being torn or anything like that. And these are also additionally beneficial because you can then use them for cataloging. You can write on the folder what this is, so you don't have to open everything to find it. You can go, oh, there's 1985 or whatever you're looking for. You should also store your objects and folders in archival boxes and purpose-built cupboards and cabinets. We want to make sure that we're using the right materials so that they're strong enough to support these items. You don't want to pick up a box and have the bottom fall out, for example. So these are good quality storage is very important. If you are going to store items in boxes, you want to make sure that they are either a good snug fit or that you pad out the extra space either with archival cardboard, foam, or tissue, because if they slide around, they might bump up against the edges and get damaged. There can be abrasions of them rubbing against each other. So we want to make sure that they can't shift around in those boxes. If you are going to use paper folders and boxes, there are 3 terms you want to look for in your materials. You want them to be acid-free, lignin-free, and buffered. You'll quite commonly see if you were to buy folders that they'll say just acid-free, and that can be a little bit of like a misdirect, because what it means is that they were acid-free at the time of manufacture and not that they will stay acid-free forever. So that's why you want it to be lignin-free and buffered. Lignin is the bad component of paper that you see in newspaper, for example, which degrades the paper quickly and over time. So we want to have that lignin removed. And then buffered means that it's got an extra chemical added to that paper or box. That means it's going to help counteract and fight acidity. So that's very important for especially acidic documents. If you use plastic sleeves, there's another 3 terms you want to look for. They should either be polyethylene, polypropylene, or polyester. A lot of plastic archival sleeves are polyester. The common brand name in the US is Mylar, but you want to make sure that it's either polyethylene, polypropylene, or polyester, because that means that there's no other stuff added to that plastic, and that other stuff can slowly volatilize over time and it can cause damage to it. I don't know if any of you had ever seen like one of those old flexible rulers, and then over time it becomes like tacky and sticky, and then eventually it just like starts cracking. That's because there's other stuff added to that plastic to make it that bendy, soft plastic, and that stuff slowly leaches out. But the nice thing about polyethylene, polypropylene, and polyester is that's it. It's got nothing else. So there's nothing to leach out, so it's going to be very stable over time. You do also want to make sure if you're buying stuff that, especially for photographs, it should say that it's passed the photograph activity test or PAT. There's an institute up in Rochester, New York, the Image Permanence Institute. And they do a lot of research into photographic materials and what is safe for them. So they will actually test new materials as they come out to see if they're safe for use for photographs. So if you go on to one of the reputable archival online stores, Hollinger, Metal Edge, Gaylord, Talus, I can't remember the other ones, University Products, I'm sure you all know these various places, but they'll actually say next to the item when you go onto that page, past the PAT. So then you know that that is safe for photographs. For book storage, you want to make sure that they are upright and they're supported on either end, and also that they're not packed in too tightly, that they're going to rub against each other or going to get damaged while you're trying to take it off the shelf. You don't want them slumped at an angle because over time, gravity's working on that spine and it's going to break that spine and it's going to get damaged. So we wanted to make sure we keep it upright. You also want to make sure that you handle all your objects with clean, dry hands. You may have heard previously about those white cotton gloves and that you want to wear those sort of things. We don't use white cotton gloves anymore. They are bad. They are not single-use items. They don't fit very well. You kind of lose your sensitivity. So if you imagine trying to turn a page in a book wearing those, it's very difficult. So you may actually damage that book with handling it. So we recommend that you just wash your hands with plain soap and water and dry them, and that's it. No lotions, no hand sanitizer, just clean, dry hands. You also want to make sure that the surface that you're working on is also clean and dry. With photographs, you want to be careful when you handle them. So you want to avoid bending, creasing, or tearing them. You want to support them with both hands so that they're not going to accidentally be bent or creased. If you do need to handle something that is oversized or fragile, you can put it on a piece of cardboard. And if you need to turn it over, you can put another piece of cardboard on top and then turn it over so that it doesn't flop around and get potentially torn. The only instance that we do recommend using gloves is if you are handling photographs or photographic negatives or film. That is because the heat from your fingers can also leave that fingerprint impression on the photograph. So in those instances, we recommend using nitrile gloves, which are just those like blue surgical gloves that you can see, and they come in a range of sizes so you can get them a nice snug fit, and they're very thin so you don't lose that sensitivity when you're handling stuff. For handling books, you don't want to bend or crack the spine. Please never just bend it back on itself, because that's just going to break the spine and it's going to start falling apart. You also don't want to open a book more than it naturally wants to open. So you want to just be careful that you don't force it further open. It's something very important to consider if you want to make photocopies or anything like that, that you don't break the spine or damage the spine by pressing it onto like the platen for photocopying. When you remove books from the shelf, you want to grip it by its spine and not use your finger to pull forward at the end cap. You see all this damage at the top of these books is from somebody kind of pulling it at that top to get it forward. And the first time it's fine, the second time it's fine, but repetitive pulling at that spine will start tearing that spine away. So you want to grip this from the actual whole spine. If you can't grip the spine because it's too tight on the shelf, you can reach your hand behind it and then push it forward from the back. Also, please don't repair anything that is very valuable. Like, there are safe ways to repair it, and we teach workshops on how to do that. So if you want to, you can keep an eye on the Georgia Archives website and see when we are having these workshops, but you don't want to repair anything. And you especially don't want to use anything that sticks by itself on anything valuable. If it's not valuable, fine, go ahead, use all the magic tape you like. But on these very fragile or valuable historic documents, you don't want to use any tape. And that includes anything that says it's archival or document repair or anything. If it sticks by itself, it is not safe for your historic materials. Here you can see an old map where they taped along the folds because the folds were starting to break. And this is old adhesive that is now seeped into the paper. So it's now part of the paper itself and nothing can be done about this. This is now permanent. And it's actually more damaged at the places where the tape was than the rest of the paper. So don't use tape. If you come away with nothing else from this, don't use tape. Paper clips and staples can also cause damage because they can rust. They can also put creases in the document. If you try to take it off, they can tear at your documents. So by and large, we do not recommend using any paper clips or staples. If you do absolutely have to use paper clips to keep documents together, you can use a stainless steel paper clip over a piece of buffered paper. So you just fold a piece of paper over the edge and slide the paper clip on top. So at least the paper clip's not directly against your object. Ideally, you'd rather just use a paper folder or plastic sleeve to keep these documents together and not a paper clip. Also be aware that accidents happen. So you want to be very careful around having any food or liquids around your records when you're using them. You may think that it's fine to have your cup of coffee and then you kind of looking over and you didn't realize that it was so close and now you've spilled coffee all over your documents, and we don't want that. So try avoid using any or having any food or liquids around your documents. If you do need to make any inscriptions or notes on any documents, please rather use a soft pencil and not a pen. The pen is going to be more permanent and difficult to remove. That ink can also bleed, fade, or stain. And even if you are being careful and trying to make notes on a notepad next to what you're working on with a pen, you may absent-mindedly drop the pen and cause a mark on it or something like that. So rather use a pencil, and then it's a much easier situation if you were to, again, accidents happen. Another thing to consider with preserving your records is to digitize them. That means that you are not necessarily going to have to handle the original items as often, so you can refer back to the digital copies for doing any research. It also means that, say, for example, you've got a lot of family records. You can share those records with a broader selection of your family and not just have one person have everything for themselves. It also means that if these items were to get damaged or just naturally degrade over time, you'll have the digital copy going forward. With regards to digitization, you want to be careful of technological concerns. So that could be technological obsolescence or the media degrading. If you had records on one of these old floppy disks, how many of you could access them these days? We don't have floppy disk readers. Oh, we got one hand, so it's a couple of people. So that is something we want to be very careful of, is that you are migrating your digitized materials to new systems. So you may have had them on your floppy disk, and then maybe you copied it onto a CD, and then maybe now it's on a hard drive or even on like a cloud server. One thing I do want to identify is that the cloud is not just some nebulous space up in the ether. It does exist on a physical server somewhere. So say, for example, you have them saved into like a Microsoft OneDrive, or you have it on like a Google Drive or something like that. That just means it's living on Microsoft or Google's servers somewhere, I don't know, somewhere. But if anything were to happen to those servers, you would lose your stuff. So you kind of want to make sure that you have lots of places where these are saved so that if it is damaged in one place, you have it in another. And then the last thing I want to get into today is disaster preparedness and response, because sometimes the worst does happen, and that could be something small, like just a leaky main or a pipe burst, or it could be that a tornado comes through if you live near the coast, maybe hurricanes, things like that. So bad things do happen, and we want to make sure that we try avoid having them negatively affect both ourselves and our collection items as best we can. So disaster preparedness and response is a cycle. You'll have first preparation, where you'll try see what could potentially go wrong and take steps to avoid it, or make sure that you have materials that you need to quickly respond. And then a disaster will happen. I'm not saying might happen, I'm saying will happen. It might just be something small like dropping a cup of coffee or something like that. But we like to just make sure everyone understands that disasters happen. Then you're going to respond. And that might be turning off the water mains or mopping up the coffee. And then you're going to go into the recovery phase, which is fixing whatever was damaged. And then you're going to take all of that information you learned from the response and recovery and feed that back into your preparation. So you go, okay, we had a burst pipe. maybe that is a bigger problem and we need to have a plumber out to inspect all our pipes to make sure that we can have them fixed so we don't have another burst pipe. So here we go with preparation. The key to minimizing the effect of any type of disaster is a quick response. So if we can get that item off the floor or the water turned off quickly, it's going to be a less of a disaster. In the midst of a disaster, large or small, it can be difficult to react quickly as required because you're just in panic mode. So the best way to ensure that you are having the correct and appropriate response to a disaster is preparation so that you can plan ahead, know what to do, and react quickly and appropriately. And this is not just to save your archival collections. This could be saving even lives if something were to happen in your homes. So at a minimum, you should try have an emergency plan, and this should include an emergency call list. So who do you call in the case of a disaster? Evacuation procedures. So if you had to leave your house quickly in a disaster, where do you go? How does your family know where they're all meeting? And then basic water and fire response. Those are the main disasters that tend to happen. Other information you may want to have in your emergency plan are vendors and utilities. So who is your water utility? Who's your gas utility? Who do you call for these various things? Who's your plumber that you go to, or your electrician? So you're not Googling at 3 a.m. after a burst pipe or something. Emergency services, you may need them. Depending on how large a disaster is, and this may be less of a factor for your personal homes, but if you work at an institution, you may need to have disaster response companies or contractors information, and then your insurance information that you can get quickly so that you can try get this process moving quickly. So there's three phases or main ways to prepare for a disaster. First, you can avoid it. So that means doing a risk assessment. What could possibly be a risk to your collection? Ongoing maintenance and repair. So you fix that leaky roof, or you get that loose electrical wiring taken care of. Correct building environmental control. So that's your temperature and humidity levels. And then correct storage, handling, and transportation, which we've already discussed. To minimize a disaster, you want to make sure you keep that emergency plan up to date. You have fire detection and suppression, so that could be having smoke detectors, getting your ABC fire extinguishers, things like that. Response equipment and materials. Do you have paper towels and a bucket and mop to get water off the ground, things like that. You also want to do training and drills, and that can be just making everyone aware of how to use these things and how to appropriately respond. And then making sure you have good security and access, that not anyone can get access to your collection materials. And the last one you can't control so much, but you can mitigate against, is knowing your local geography and weather. Are you in an area that's prone to getting tornadoes? You need to take additional steps to try and minimize potential damage. Do you get flooding? Do you get wildfires? These are things that you can know about and then take steps to try prepare for. And then response. So the disaster has happened. We need to respond. And you should try respond within 24 to 48 hours, because after that is when we start getting problems like mold. And that's then an additional problem on top of the first problem. The main thing for any response is to preserve human life and safety above all else. Our records are important, but they are not as important as your family and the people around you. A disaster may need to be addressed by emergency services first before you're allowed to get access. So if there's a fire, the fire department's going to have to come in and clear it out before you would be allowed access. And you also want to make sure you're using the correct PPE or personal protective equipment. So say, for example, you have a flood. What is that water? Is it sewer water or is it tap water? Because if it's sewer water, you don't want to be touching that with your bare hands. You want to then wear gloves. You maybe even need to wear like an N95 mask if you suspect mold and things like that. We don't want you to get sick in fixing this disaster. So the first steps is, if possible, to stop the cause. So that could be turning off the taps or water mains. You want to notify the appropriate personnel or even emergency services if necessary. You want to then assess the situation and damage. One of the biggest problems is people just rush in and want to start fixing. You want to take a step back, get a full picture of what has happened, and then you can make an appropriate plan so you're not wasting time or resources and you can get to the important things first. So then you create your action plan. You also want to control access and security if necessary, so not anyone can just waltz in. And then you want to address the climate and the environment. The main key for any water event, and water tends to be the main thing that happens. You put out fires with water. If a pipe bursts, water. If there's severe weather, water. So water is one of the main things we want to make sure you know how to address. And the key for that is you want to keep the temperature low. We don't want to raise the temperature because that's actually going to cause mold to grow faster. And you want to dry out that location as fast as possible. So that's getting all the standing water off the ground. You maybe even need to get a dehumidifier to dry out the area. And then you want to triage any damaged items. So you're dealing with the worst things or the most urgent things first. And maybe you even go, this is too damaged. I'm not going to waste time trying to fix this when I can work on that. And then finally, we get to the recovery phase. This may take weeks to years, depending on the extent of the damage, especially if there's damage to a building. You also then, part of the recovery is repairing a building and repairing or replacing any equipment and collections. You also want to clean and disinfect the damaged area, especially if there's potential mold. We want to get that nice and clean. And then finally, you want to debrief on the disaster. You want to, as we said, you want to feed the information you've learned from this experience into your preparations so that you can potentially avoid it in the future or respond better. So that means updating the emergency plan, updating your procedures, updating training, and replacing any supplies that you used. And that is all I have to say for today. So I'm open to taking any questions that you might have about any of this. Yes, got a question, Rick.
Okay, suppose you inherit or obtain a book that smells musty.
Mhm.
What are your recommendations?
Musty tends to mean mildew or something like that. I would say you want to air it out. So clean air, just kind of open it out, fan the pages. You especially want to make sure that it's not potentially still wet or anything if it's been in a humid or wet environment. So fan it out, keep the air moving. So that could be having a fan going in that area. Don't point the fan directly at the book. It can fall over or get damaged. To kind of have the fan pointed kind of off to the side. So you just want to keep that air moving and allow it to air out, and just give it a couple of days like that. That smell may just be permanent. So that's something to consider, but we definitely want to make sure it's not doing anything. Also open the book and check inside the hollow of the spine to make sure there's no mold in there, because that's got a lot of adhesives and stuff, and a lot of moisture can hang out there. So we definitely want to make sure there's no mold living there. But you definitely want to just air it out, let it dry. Don't use any chemicals or sprays on it. So just leave it like that. Another possibility, if that smell persists, is once you've had it air out for long enough, you can put it in a plastic box with some baking soda, and that can help absorb some of that smell. But don't put the baking soda on it, just next to it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yes. Question at the back here?
In regards to storing items, I have been researching like family history or whatever, and I have put them in the clear folders and I've put them in notebooks. And I also did research for my doctorate degree, and I have to store those items. They're in notebooks also, and I have to store those items for like 5 years, the educational one. Now, I put them in, instead of like the cardboard box or the file cabinet, I rented a storage space and I put them in, you know, the black tubs you can buy at Staples or Office Depot.
Yeah.
Those will be okay to hold up for up to 5 years.
They should be fine. One thing I would suggest maybe adding is getting some of those silica gel packs, because that can help control humidity if it gets, like, especially if it's in a storage space, you don't have a lot of control over the temperature and humidity. So those silica gel packs are really great because they'll absorb any excess moisture, but then if it starts drying out too much, they'll release the moisture back out. So those can help control humidity.
I would drop them inside.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Got 2 or 3 questions. First
Okay.
and foremost, very, very helpful, very informative. Couple things. I've received from my mother and father's side things from the late 1700s, 1800s, and I've even found that some of my grandfather used paper clips, metal paper clips. I would imagine I would take some clippers and I don't want to pull them off because it'll certainly tear. Maybe take some clippers to cut the paper clips and then put a plastic clip back. What's good to put back once I remove the metal clip that's starting to rust?
So first, in removing the paper clip, what you want to do is you want to get like a flat metal spatula or a very thin knife, and you can put it under there, and you kind of want to lever it open so that you don't slide it off. You just open the whole thing up, and then you can slide it off safely. Don't use plastic paper clips. Those are not good plastic in the first place, and they actually cause more tearing. So what I said before with the stainless steel paper clip over a piece of acid-free paper would be the best way to replace them.
And certainly in a store, this has made me also realize maybe going to a Home Depot or a Lowe's or whatever, and they have storage cabinets. I'm wondering if you have a sealed storage cabinet, would that not be a good thing to store in your basement if that's the only place you have to store it, but make sure it's sealed? And I mean, what are your thoughts on that type of a cabinet?
Number one, I'd make sure that you have a schedule that you go and check on those records, and you go down into the basement and you make sure it's fine. Number two, the cabinet itself should be powder coated steel, because that's a inert coating that's not going to damage anything, and it's not going to leach anything out. And then third, like I said to the lady, use those silica gel packs to control any humidity in that area.
Thank you very much. And one last thing, I went to the Virginia archives and they had documents 1700s. I went back into a special room. I was raised that you don't touch documents or pictures and photographs like you just mentioned. I was amazed that they actually said, we do not use gloves because of exactly what you said, because at the end of the day, you think there's oil on your hands that's damaging the product. It's more of the tear. So people they don't use gloves.
Sensitivity.
So,
clean dry hands. Wash your hands regularly because the oils will come back over time. Like our skin needs the oils to lubricate themselves. So you're going to have to wash your hands every few hours. In winter, that can be a problem. Your hands may dry out and stuff. Maybe you just need to be careful how often you're working with the records, because definitely no lotion or anything while you're working with them. You're just putting more oil back on. So clean, dry hands, no lotion, wash your hands regularly. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned obsolete technology like old discs. Does the archives here have any old disc readers? How far back does the technology here go?
We have some things like I think we have for like audio cassette tapes. We got technology for that. We are actually in the middle of a project of trying to get information off old hard drives, and some of the software is now out of date and we can't open them. So we've had to get special software to open these, finding adapters that plug into our USB ports, and it's not all the same plugs. And I'm sure you all remember the days where every cell phone had its own type of plug and things. So that is a problem. We don't have a lot of historic stuff like that, though. Yes, ma'am.
Couple, I think I know the first one, but I have sleeves and in notebooks. And right now they're standing up, but that's a no-no, right? Aren't they all supposed to be like this?
It's fine for flat items to be, if they're supported, they can be standing up, or if it's a notebook, something like that. If they're very large, or the notebooks themselves are large, you then want it horizontal just so gravity's not working against you. We have a lot of old, especially tax ledgers that are just really big, heavy books, and the spines are breaking just because they're literally falling out of the covers because they're so heavy. So old, big books literally tear themselves apart because of their weight. So those we want to store on flat on their side. The one thing, though, that you do want to store on end is anything that's brittle. So that will be LPs, any vinyl discs, things that are prone to shattering, any glass, if you have old glass plate photographs, glass plate negatives, those things you want to store on end because they're less at risk of vibrations that cause them to shatter. And just a tip, if you ever are moving house and you have framed artworks, pack them in the box vertically. They're less at risk of the glass shattering.
Okay, framings, got 4 or 5 from the land lotteries, the deeds, whatever, they'll have the ribbon and the wax that's made a spot on the paper and stuff. I'd like to frame them, I think, and keep my direct sunlight, but then there's something about kind of glass and backing and all that kind of stuff.
You'll have to talk to a framer and make sure that they're using good materials. So yeah, good mat board. You'll probably need what they call a sink mat to create enough space between the glass or the glazing on the front that doesn't crush that seal. One thing with framing is make sure they're not using any kind of tapes or anything to attach it to any matte backing boards. There are good quality adhesives they could use, such as wheat starch paste or methyl cellulose, but we don't want them, like, honestly, framers keep paper conservators in business because you don't know what's going on inside that frame until you open it up. And then I've seen masking tape, duct tape, all sorts of bad things that are just under there that you don't know because it's all hidden in that structure. So definitely make sure you use a reputable framer and they tell you what materials they're using.
There's something about the glass.
Just glass is fine. Glass is inert. Glass doesn't do any damage. If you have something very large, you can use acrylic, like plexiglass and things like that, just because it's lighter. The only thing is that it's more prone to scratching and things like that. Yeah.
Rick Boyd, Vivid Fix, you'll hear from me in a couple of minutes. I love hearing whether it be vertical or horizontal storage. A lot of people don't realize that magnetic particle items like tape should also be stored vertically, because if you do it horizontally, the magnetic particles are literally dropping off the tape as you're storing them. So those should also be stored vertically.
Also, with regards to that, so any magnetic media, such as like VHS tapes, cassette tapes, things like that, they are also prone to demagnetizing with shocks and vibrations. So again, storing them on end minimizes shocks and vibrations. Yes, sir.
More of a comment, and you may have other method. What I found, we've got like a letter written by my grandfather in the 1830s in pencil and one written by his grandfather in the 1880s in pencil that stated so bad. Xerox or basically scan a copy and it brings the ink out so you can't read it. And there might be a better way.
Well, there's a lot you can do now with digital manipulation and Photoshop and things like that. So, for example, us with our reformatting lab, so when we scan microfilm, some of that microfilm is just poorly photographed and very faded. So they will then manipulate the scanned image in Photoshop or another image manipulation program to change the darkness, the exposure, contrast, things like that to try and pull it forward as well. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Related to that, are you doing, here at the archives, are you doing reprocessing of old digitized items? Or is this something that as you digitize microfilm, the processes were already modern enough?
We have had to.
Very early digitization of microfilm, et cetera, was not as good. It needs to be redone.
We have had to redo some previous scans just because the pixels per inch was so small at the time. So it just gets pixelated when you zoom in. We've had some things that weren't microfilm, but were just overhead photographs that were done 15, 20 years ago. And just the photography at the time wasn't that good. So those we're reprocessing in that sense, yes.
So that's one thing in your work.
Yeah,
process.
we try. So that's one thing we try to do now is we try to do the best quality we can so that we don't have to go back and do it again. It's not to say that we won't have to if technology improves enough, but at least we try prolong the lifespan of these these digitized items as much as we can. Because again, scanning does put them at a lot of risk. There's a lot of handling, a lot of exposure to light and different environments. Sometimes we have to try like flatten them as best we can so that we get a good copy, and we don't want to like manipulate them more than we have to. Yes, ma'am.
Like a very large item that would not fit in a typical like file folder or plastic sleeve. Like it's a book, but it's come apart, but it's a scrapbook with multiple images and writing, and it's like rather large. What?
You can get, so a lot of those companies I mentioned before, Hollinger, Metal Edge, Gaylord, we have a list of vendors on our website if you're interested in. They do have standard size boxes that there are some oversized ones. You can also have custom boxes ordered as well, where you just give them the dimensions and they'll make a box to your specifications if you need.
Since it's so large and multiple pages, would you just then put the whole thing in a box? Like how do you?
Potentially, yes. Scrapbooks are, I will say scrapbooks are the bane of paper conservators because their archival value is is the relationship between the items, but a lot of the items aren't archival, and scrapbook paper itself tends to be not great. So it can be very difficult as a conservation project. We focus on digitizing the individual pages so that we don't have to go to the scrapbook itself as often. And then really it's just good storage and making sure that it's safe and stable. Yes, ma'am.
The Container Store has some Lucite clear boxes that are for display or whatever that maybe she could use. But then I asked the question, is that a safe container for?
What is the plastic? Yeah, it really goes back to what are the specifications of the material. One thing I do warn people about is that there's no standardized archival, museum grade or conservation grade anything. A lot of industries or companies will use those terms for marketing purposes, but it doesn't mean that they are archival. So you really want to look at what the specifications are. What is the type of plastic? Is it polyethylene, polypropylene, and polyester? If not, then it's not a good material. Is the paper buffered, acid-free, lignin-free? If it doesn't say those terms, it's not a safe paper. So don't rely on just it being called archival, because that's really just marketing. Yes, sir.
I have old photograph albums that had the adhesive backing. You just put the pictures on top. And some of them are really, all of them are so old. Now they have all come loose. They're no longer sticking to the book, but there's still residual glue on the backs of the pictures. Is there any way to get rid of that or minimize its continued damage?
Yeah, those old magnetic things they used to call them, those are the worst. They really are the worst. At this point, if they've already fallen out, that adhesive has what we call cross-linked. So it's gone from being like a sticky, very viscous fluid to essentially a solid. So it's crystallized. All you can do is use like a scalpel blade to scrape it off, or very fine sandpaper, but you're going to have to be very, very careful that you don't abrade the back of the photographs. But just try remove as much of that adhesive just with a scalpel or a blade or something carefully. Any other question? Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned earlier about the book with the spine, possible mold or mildew in the spine. So in cases like that, where you have something like that, or paper that has a visible mold and mildew on it, is there any safe removal technique, or do you just let it air out and hope it dissipates, or how does?
So step one is drying it out. We don't want it to be active mold. We want it to be desiccated mold. So it's active mold tends to be more gooey and it smears. Inactive mold is more powdery. So we want to dry it out completely so it's inactive. And then you can use a soft brush to remove the surface spores. But the problem with mold is that it puts essentially its roots down into the paper or the substrate, and we can't remove those roots. So you can only remove what's on the surface. The main thing after that is to be very careful that it doesn't get exposed to high humidity, because that can cause the mold to start growing again. Mold is the worst. That's why we want to do that disaster response within 24 to 48 hours so we don't have mold. Any last questions? Thank you all for being a wonderful audience and giving me such great questions.